Welcome everybody. Thank you once again for being here. It means a lot to Vijay and I. We started off this podcast, as you said, a year ago. We made a commitment to doing 10, and we figured we'd see at that point if they were any good or not. The first 2 or 3 were terrible. They were really bad. They were rough. But as Vijay shared, we persisted because our egos are huge, and we really, really like avoiding work at the office. And so we kind of figured it out, and we've been so pleased and so thrilled that so many people have taken the time to listen to this podcast, who have surprised Vijay and I as we go to various events around the GTA and the province where people tell us they've heard of Never Worked Right, and who, but most importantly, who have taken an interest in how cities develop, have taken an interest in civic discourse, have taken an interest in learning about how cities work at a time that is increasingly difficult for us to understand. We live in a world where the machinations that shape the places that we live are increasingly opaque. We have, as Vijay touched on, fewer and fewer reliable sources to tell us what is going on in the halls of power. We don't pretend to be journalists at all, but any effort made, I think, to help people understand how things work, I think is worthwhile. Anyone who takes the time to listen, however clumsy and awkward it may be at times to listen to us, to be part of that journey is commendable. So I appreciate y'all being here tonight for that. So thank you. In terms of where we are tonight, So as Vijay shared, we have some fantastic sponsors. One of them whom we want to acknowledge is the Beehive. So for those of you who are new to this space, welcome. This is probably, I would argue, as someone who works in an office in downtown Brampton, this is the nicest office space in downtown Brampton. It's the best view of downtown Brampton. You get to see construction, you get to see trains, you get to see everything happening. But what this is inside is a really special and unique place. The city of Brampton has really committed to the spirit of entrepreneurship. It's one of the lovely messy byproducts. We use the word messy a lot tonight. If this were a drinking game, it would be bad. But it is the wonderful messy byproduct of a newcomer community is the spirit of entrepreneurship. And there's some unfortunate reasons that comes about when we talk about people's access to employment opportunities, but there's some amazing things that come about from that as well. Innovation happens because of newcomers. And among the things the city of Brampton has tried to bottle is that energy and turn it into something. And so we sit, for those of you who took the GO train down, you may have noticed the station is referred to as the Innovation District Station. And this corridor that we're on along Main Street, along Highway 10, depending on where you're coming from, it is built of a number of incubators. Vijay talked about Scooty being incubated in the Brampton Entrepreneur Center. We also have a RIC, which is focused on clean tech. We have an investment here by the Toronto Metropolitan University. It's all focused around medtech startups and cybersecurity. And then we ourselves are in a building that houses down below, if you had the opportunity to visit, the Brampton Arts Organization and the Beehive, individuals who may come already with amazing work or lived experience, who may lack the network or contacts or opportunities to thrive in Canada. The Beehive puts these wraparound services around them to give them the supports they need, the contacts they need, and the resources they need to succeed. And this is early in the journey of these investments. We've already seen some great companies fostered and grown here. There's a number of faces in the crowd right now who are successful businesses who started here. And we're very confident this is going to be a big part of Brampton's journey going forward. So welcome to the space. It's a very, I think, symbolically important space in terms of what it is to be in Brampton right now in 2026. So it's our 25th podcast. Yes. It's a special podcast. Yes. So I got you a gift. Yeah.
I didn't get you anything.
No. Your presence is all we need.
Oh, man.
I got you your very own call bell.
Gosh.
For those who are listening to the news, you understand the symbolism?
Yes.
Wow. So now you know I'm bro-y enough to be on a podcast with you. If Pierre Paul wasn't too, well, we could do bells, kettlebells. You and I do kettlebells.
Oh my God. Zero beef is a superfood, apparently?
Apparently, according to Pierre Paul of Joe Rogan, it is.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. So let's start with that then. Pierre Polyev was on the Joe Rogan Experience.
Yes.
How do we feel about that?
I mean, I have lots of feels about that. And I understand if I worked for Pierre Polyev, I would say this is a really smart thing. Go out there, show you're reasonable, show some other side of you, connect with a base. It's a friendly audience. It's the most listened to podcast in the world. But my goodness, it was the most cringy thing I had ever. Who's listened to the Rogan podcast with? He was trying so hard to be cool. It was painful to listen to.
as he was clearly reading Wikipedia answers on the history of kettlebells and whatever brosier things around his diet. It was a very strange podcast listening.
It was very strange. And you know what was stranger is the reaction of the legacy media. Like they assembled panels of pundits who were saying, "Oh wow, this was this was a great sort of showing for Polyev. He defended Canada. It was very honorable. Yeah, he didn't criticize the Prime Minister on foreign soil." And then I watched it, and I it was like exactly what you said, that he is obsequious to Joe Rogan. He is looking at just kind of not really ruffle any feathers. There's actually a moment. I don't know if you remember this, but there's a moment where they're talking about the superfoods or whatever. And
I was taking notes.
Yeah. And Joe Rogan actually says, people should be consuming butter and tallow and not canola.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Polyev just agreed with him, as if canola is not a major Canadian export.
Yeah. And pretty frankly, the only reason we have to deal with China right now.
Yes, exactly. So it was very strange. Yeah, very strange. I don't know. Yeah.
I think for me, there's a couple things that I thought were interesting. First, that a Canadian politician, in order to get an audience, had to go on a U.S. podcast.
Yeah.
And I think more than anything else, we can take a lot from the podcast itself, and I have some notes and some thoughts. But to me, the biggest piece I struggled with is not that we did a Canadian Joe Rogan, but the fact that we don't have a platform like this in our country where an elected leader, can go on and talk to the population about their ideas, taking no commentary about the quality of the idea set. The fact that this is what he felt he had to do, and I understand some component of that was probably Giovanni damage control, and he had to show that the Conservative Party has a reasonable approach to engaging the United States.
Yeah.
But that was the part that hurt me the most. Not that we're that, but as people who cosplay as being podcasters, like if it hurt me that we didn't have something here that he felt he could go on to.
He didn't come to the Never Border Trade podcast.
I mean, it's an open-minded debate.
But yeah, it is strange. You don't buy this argument that he wanted to speak to Americans, and that's why he went down south.
I mean, if he wants to, he can go ahead and do that, but I don't know what he accomplished by doing that.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the American public is not voting for Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah.
And if, you take whatever narrative you want from last year's election, but I subscribe to, among the reasons he's not our prime minister right now, is because he appeals to an American audience.
Yeah.
When Joe Rogan, who is the fill in your religious, deity reference of choice, whatever. He's the high priest of the MAGA movement to those bros. When he says, "I will vote for you" on that podcast, I think he actually, if I was Pierre Poilievre's guy, this is the worst thing that could have happened. You just got the ringing endorsement of the same guy who tanked the election for you last year.
Yeah, and that's to say nothing of the misinformation that was being discussed.
That was the whole other thing.
Completely.
He never corrected Rogan when Rogan said anything wrong.
Yeah. What I found particularly gross is this suggestion that MAID is available for individuals experiencing seasonal depression.
Yes, and the numbers that Rogan quoted in terms of the number of Canadians that are accessing MAID as well.
Yeah.
Polyev did nothing to dispel. So again, he totally signed off on this idea that MAID is as easy to get as a flu shot, and Canadians are dying left and right because of our access to MAID, and all we need to do is get more fresh air and swing some kettlebells, and we'll be okay.
There you go.
But he did nothing to dispel that. So I thought, like in many ways, if what you're looking for is a check mark that the people who love you, then go and appeal to your base. But I don't see what he's accomplishing in doing that.
Gross. Yeah.
If I was, you have more to say on this, that if I was a liberal strategist, I'd be like, call the election.
Oh yeah.
100%. He just showed you he's got nothing.
Yeah.
Right? He had this platform to do anything he wanted. And what did he choose to do? He went on the platform and said, "Look, I respect Mark Carney. I'm signing off. I'm a polite politician."
Yeah.
He basically endorsed everything whatever Carney is doing in the U.S., Pierre Poilievre did nothing to dispel it. The only thing he spoke to was some fringe stuff on the domestic issues, healthcare, mental health, in no constructive way.
Yeah.
He offered no policy. He offered no original thought.
Yeah.
And doubled down on the fact that if you're an outsider looking at this, you're like, this guy's still MAGA. If I was, I'm going to call him Mark. In my made up world where I'm an advisor to the Liberal Party, I'm on a first name basis of the Prime Minister. I'd be going, Mark, call the election now because this guy's got nothing, and you want your super majority, you're going to get it.
How do you feel about this soft rebrand of Polyev into this? I call it the Thomas Mulcairification.
Let me just I take off my glasses and now I'm cool.
Yeah. There's also, Tom Mulcair was this attack dog for the NDP, and then he had to run in a general election, and then all of a sudden you see him kind of awkwardly smiling at people and trying to hug people and whatever. Pierre Poilievre is kind of doing the same thing. He's kind of assembling this image of civility, and now CBC loves that. They love the performance of civility. So are you buying that at all? Or?
Not at all. I mean, it's all political theater. What do you think? Because I would argue the audience he's trying to appeal to, you're closer to demographically than I am. So how do you think?
I think he's sort of outrunning his image a little bit. I think that'll take some time. But I will say, if there's a conservative government in Canada's future, it will have to be a red Tory conservative government, right? Stephen Harper did not form government until he had the endorsement of Bill Davis. We're in Brampton, right? Bill Davis, as an example. You have to appeal to the 905. You have to appeal to these sort of blue liberals, red Tories sort of votes.
And I think that's why you see them casting about in this weird way, right? Because that territory is no longer his territory.
Yeah.
Mark Carney has taken it. So he, and I think this is the crux of the matter, because I think you're absolutely right, but they can't build on that foundation because the Liberal Party's come so far right that his only play now is to go further right and risk alienating, or try to find these sort of margin issues where we'll like him because he's cooler than Mark Carney.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing with the kettlebell was so weird. It's like Carney runs marathons, so I'm gonna swing kettlebells because like the kettlebell guy's tougher and cooler than the marathon guy is what that felt like to me. Yeah. He's trying to create some personality driven. It's almost like he's going to Trudeau's playbook, than Harper's playbook.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Let me be the guy who want to have.
I think we have time for one more topic.
Sure,
if we can.
I talked a lot on that one, so
yeah. Well, I'm curious about your the perspective that you might have on this FOI legislation that the premier is looking to amend.
I mean, this is talking about opportunities for elections and where parties are at. To me, this speaks to the real issue right now, right? Like in this province, we have a premier who I think is acting in the way that a person who has unchecked power is going to act. That everything that has been thrown at his government as a scandal has bounced off them. There is no accountability to any decision they've made. They've made tremendously poor ones that are going to bankrupt this province in the future. And yet he's just doubling down on the fact that none of which can ask me any questions. You can't access any of our paperwork. You can't understand what's going on in our conversations. You're not allowed to question our thought process. And away we go, and away we go, and away we go. But I don't think it's, respectfully, the quantity of FOIs is not the same as what are the bombshells in FOIs.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. So me trying to understand how some funding allocation went on a project is very different. And 20 of those is not equivalent to one FOI saying, who is the premier talking to when suddenly someone who he's coaching but gets awarded the opportunity to build a spa on the waterfront of Toronto.
Yeah,
those are not equal in terms of the importance.
No, I completely agree, and I think the what's particularly egregious is this idea that the premier is using his personal cell phone to conduct all of his business. And let's try this again. All right, I think it's broken. The premier is using his personal cell phone to conduct all of his business, and he got kind of caught with his pants down, and now he's looking to change the law so that he can protect himself. This is the clearest example of just taking a ball and going home. It is so apparent, and to your point, it's because he's on the spur of McGlory, and he's quickly heading into having the longest record in office in this province.
Well, similarly being the least popular premier in all of Canada, speaks as much to the lack of opposition that it does anything else. Because not only does he have this majority and the ability to do this, where is the resistance going to come from?
Yeah.
Who at Queen's Park wearing a red or an orange or a green tie is saying, or a sweater or whatever, saying anything about this? And I think the piece I'm waiting for.
So I think that's good on our segments.
Okay.
Why don't we?
So for For those who haven't listened to the podcast before, it's like an hour of that. So if you're having fun, this is awesome.
Yeah.
And if you're not, how you know?
So we have a really great couple of guests that are going to be coming up very shortly, but we'll just give a little bit of context. Yeah. So several months ago, we attended the book launch of Messy Cities. We have a number of friends who've contributed to the book and then co-edited. We have a number of friends who've also contributed chapters as well, and we both read the various essays, and we were thinking of Brampton and the entire family. I was.
Well, I mean, to be fair, rather, there were a couple where, like, Brampton specifically called out, as is my hometown of Scarborough. I was really happy, so thank you. But yeah, it was an impossible book to read without reading Brampton over and over and over again, because the notion of what it is to be messy in a city like this, which is developing as fast as it is impossible to ignore. So yeah, absolutely. So this felt like the conversation we wanted to have. As Vijay shared, we wanted to do something kind of different for our 25th episode. And we just, are so thrilled that so many people took the same interest as we did. Because it's one thing when you do something cool to see other people enjoy that cool thing. It's the other thing when you do something that's like super nerdy. And it feels like we're all talking to each other. And then to find out, no, there's people writing books about it and people want to come out and listen to it. So I'm so happy this came together. I'm really thrilled that we're going to have this conversation tonight.
Okay, wonderful. So why don't we save some time on the intros?
Yeah.
Let's invite the four co-editors, Leslie, Dylan, John, Zahra. If you can come up.
Dylan Reid. I'm the editor of this magazine called Spacing Magazine. Thought I'd bring a little prop there. It's about urban issues in Toronto and the GTA. And I got interested in the issue of Massey-Cities a long time ago. And eventually realized that if it was going to be a book, it had to be a book that was shared between many writers and many editors. And so I talked to John, and John worked his magic and got us a deal. And then we brought on Leslie and Zahra, and we put this book together. So it's been great.
I'm Leslie Wu. I'm one of the co-editors. I trained as an architect and urban planner. I currently am the outgoing CEO of a civic engagement organization called Civic Action. Spent a lot of time on a lot of city building, urban issues in Toronto and around the region. Most of my career was actually spent with everyone's favorite organization, Metrolinx, as their head of planning. But I'm not there anymore. And I got invited by John after we were in a session at the University of Toronto School of Architecture, and they were talking about infill in cities and how do we, allow more people to come here. And I mentioned that I came from a place that had no building code, no planning act, and somehow we had a glorious life and cities emerged. I'm from Trinidad originally. So that's how I got drawn into this beautiful exercise.
Hey everyone, I'm Zahra Ebrahim, the other and co-editor of Messy Cities. I am an urbanist and I'm a public interest designer, which means I help make sure that the things that we build in our city represent the public interest. And so work really hard to make sure that community voices and communities are represented in the decisions that we make about how we want our city to evolve. I run an organization called Monumental and I teach at the University of Toronto. I think my work has always been Messy Cities, but I didn't have the language. I think that's what it is. I think the work of trying to listen to a very diverse set of publics and then work with them to design policy and spaces and all sorts of things is really messy work. So I think when Dylan and John called me and said, we're pulling together this anthology, we'd love you to be a co-editor, all the little the Tetris blocks just started to line up. I was like, oh yeah. This makes sense to me. So that's when I got involved on that Mormon vacation.
Why did you choose the term Messy Cities? Because Jaipaul and I can attest, it is a provocative title. Like we've gotten some questions about what are messy cities and what is messy urbanism. So why did you choose that?
So I mean, part of the purpose of the book is specifically to shift that pejorative attitude. I guess the thing is, as some of the people have said here, urban cities are inherently messy. There is always going to be that messiness. And the problem is always that we do see it as a pejorative. Messiness can be everything from like chaos, as we said, to just things that are regular, things that are informal, things that are done by the grassroots instead of being part of a plan, right? So all these things in there, and there's development, and there's going to be new buildings beside old buildings, new buildings and old buildings that are kind of combined together. So the problem is always that to me that is in some sense a sign of vibrancy, right? And that's one of the key goals of our book, is that messiness is necessary in a city in order to have that vibrancy, in order to have that liveliness, in order to have that innovation. But we need to shift the idea of messy from being pejorative in order to accept that kind of thing, and in order to embrace it, as opposed to seeing it as something that's dangerous or unstable or that needs to be controlled. So the goal of our book really is to shift that, the messy, from a pejorative to being something that's not the one thing that's needed, but rather something that has to be incorporated and accepted and embraced in a city, an element of the city that needs to be embraced.
Yep, I'm getting it.
So it should be known that some of us on this panel here are a little OCD, just this about. I being one of them. We've seen each other's bookcases and offices. We know who we are. But there's the point, I think one of the things that I think about when I think about the term messy is, if you're spring cleaning, it is about transformation and rebirth to a certain degree. It's all looking what it is. You take it all apart. It's a mess before you reset it into a different place. And so to me, with cities, sometimes the mess is actually space and transformation. And in a lot of the stories, it's how individuals or groups or communities take a space and then reinvent it through their own eyes in a different way, at different scales. Some are very intimate and personal, and some are much larger. And I think that's to me, that's good messy, because I had to make that mess to create that better closet that gives me grace and comfort. But I think that's the other thing, that these things can coexist. They're not an either or. And I think when part of the exercise in doing the book and using the term messy all through the whole 2 years plus, it was this deliberate desire to not define it, and that we would allow the authors themselves to put their own view into it, because it's messy is in the eye of the beholder. To an error.
I mean, yeah, it could, because it's kind of like, it's like that cutting cubes through fog or hugging a cloud, that kind of like it escapes definition, because you've got, at the end of the book, spoiler alert, we're like, some aunties out there might be very mad about this messy thing, right? Like there's like, why are you talking about messy? Like, we came here not looking for messy. Like, that's not. And so I think, just to your comment about the title, our original title was Messy Urbanism. And then the publisher said something to the extent of like, you want people to buy the book, right? And then we just started making up these awful subtitles. So we did, but we really wanted this to be an invitation into this sort of the remix reality that we live in. Like, I really like the comment over here about the tension between old and the new. But I think it's the tension between sort of like the layers of social change, the layers of demographic change, the layers of immigration, the layers of infrastructure development. Someone else said it was inevitable. I think it is inevitable that we're going to be living in this thing that is sort of tells the stories of the many people who have been here. But in the case of Toronto, and I think many other cities, we tell a single story. The obvious city that presents itself is a single story. And the messiness, to Leslie's great point, the messiness, it's a set of clues for us. It's just saying, where is the city not working just right for all of these sort of layers of folks, these waves of folks who have come through? Where is the city not quite right? And how are they employing their own agency to have the city work for them? And so I think some people say like, oh, it's chaos. Oh, people are making a mess. And others could say, oh, we're learning about what we really need for a city to be successful for more people, not just some. But
I'll just answer this by first saying that I'm not in the OCD crowd, and if we could all go back to my office, you would know why. So I think the one important answer to this question is the subtitle, why we can't plan everything. And so I write a lot about planning and development, and we live in a moment when a tremendous amount of capital can drop on a place. And large amounts of money that go to development or go into infrastructure, and it's very powerful, and it causes a lot of things to move around. But sometimes it's difficult for the life of a city, the people in the city, to kind of exist with that, the enforced homogeneity that comes with so much capital backed by so much political power. And the purpose of this book is to show that cities are very resilient. The people in cities are very resilient, and to embrace the idea that you don't have to do what the plan says all the time.
I appreciate that, and I'd love to pick up on the spread that both John and Zahra laid out. And for me, when I was reading the book, one of the things that I really embraced as it was coming across in a number of the essays was this idea of messiness really is a conversation about who gets to be involved. And as someone who's working in an organization that's part of civil society here, there's very clear lines that who gets to be part of decision making and who doesn't get to be part of decision making in a community. And what I really loved about this book was that it just showed all the ways in which people they're not waiting to be invited in. And in fact, no invitation will ever be forthcoming, because this isn't really the point of it. And I really love this idea as someone who sometimes feels like I'm outside of the community that I live in some ways, that you really found ways to demonstrate that doesn't mean you don't get to belong to a place. I'd love to hear any of you talk a little bit more about that, because that to me was one of the themes that felt really important in the book.
I was gonna say, the one story in the book that everyone refers to that's exemplary of that is the Beachdale story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this, for those of you, Floridales, I call it Beachdale. It's a beach, which is a community seeing an empty vacant lot with a fence around it. Basically decided to occupy it on a not so hot but sometimes sunny day, with a bunch of lawn chairs. Then it became a little picnic area. And then there was barbecues, and then they named it.
then it rained.
And
And they put a little sign up that said, no lifeguard on duty.
yes,
Get out the puddle.
yeah, and it started to become a very fun. It doesn't exist anymore. It got taken down, but it was, to your point, a community seeing an opportunity, occupying it. There's something a little exhilarating about pushing against the man, as my son would say, that gives it this identity. And I think that's one of the examples where, regulators and legislators don't like this kind of activity, but communities really coalesce around it. It creates a great sense of community.
And one thing that Sherry Craftsman, who's the artist who wrote about it and was one of the creators, brings out in her article is how, although she did something that was not, kosher, not allowed, and every so often got closed down, actually all the politicians loved it and kept talking about how great it was. So she was like, everyone wants to talk about this, but nobody wants to say that they are actually making it allowed. And that's kind of I think one of the things we really wanted to bring out with Messy Cities was the creative tension, right? The creative tension between messiness and order. Not that one should dominate the other, but rather that you need both in order to create the sort of vibrancy and creativity in the city. And I think the Bloordale Beach is such a great example of that, where it's completely a grassroots thing. It's not allowed, but at the same time, the local BIA, they won't give them any money, but at the same time, they tell everyone about it. And so there's this really interesting tension between, people, the sort of those in power, not officially approving of it and yet supporting it and appreciating the value that is brought. And it was ephemeral, right? So it was a space that was basically waiting for construction. That construction didn't, during the pandemic, construction didn't happen for a few years, and so they did something with it, and now it's becoming a school.
Just jump in. I think there's a piece here too, which is it's not always about those quote unquote in power. Did you open the same page? Same page. Okay, there's original thoughts abound tonight. Okay, so hands up if you read the book. No, this is not a skill testing class. You just want to know. Okay, great. So we'll get to tell you about the story. So there's a great story in the book called "An Argument Worth Having." It's an awesome piece. It's a young woman in the city who now runs, she co-founded the Kensington Market Community Land Trust and owns the Chinatown Community Land Trust after. And she was a student of mine. So it's important that I point out that she's younger because it's the conversation about sort of intergenerational tension. And I think her piece, and I opened the book just to see if she used the term. She talks about, the whole piece is about an argument she has with business uncle, who I lovingly think of as my father. My father is business uncle. He's like an, older man in the community, an entrepreneur. And she's talking about the Chinatown Land Trust, and she's trying to sort of have a negotiation with him. And he's talking about the mess that the social service agencies in the nearby, like in the surrounding area, the mess that they're creating for him. They're causing vandalism. They're causing, all sorts of unwanted people around his establishment. And she's just like, oh my God, you have any less tired takes than like this, old man. And to the conversation, and I know the story, and part of the reason she wrote the story is she comes to my class at EFT every year and she talks to students. And one day she was like, I gotta go argue with the guy with business uncle. And she would just go every few days and sit down with this guy who was opposing all the things that they were trying to do for his generation of aging Chinese seniors who had come as immigrants and were now not really quite understanding what this younger generation was trying to do with the land trust. And I think in their mind, he was thinking, oh, they want to do more of this stuff that's already bothering me all the time. And so she would go every few days and she'd just sit with him before his restaurant opened and they'd fight. And it was sort of this ritual she established, and it was her way of staying in the conversation with someone, quote unquote, in power in her community, which was the uncles, the elders within our community who were like, please stop making a mess. All we want is just order. That's what we came here for. And so I think that to me was a really great example of like, it's not just about negotiating with those in power and sort of the establishment as we think about the establishment, or the institution as we think about institutions. But the institutions are our elders in many cases. They're the ones stopping us from making a mess. They're the ones who are sort of, even, like my parents came from Kenya, it's their generation who are now getting their own sort of shades of modern NIMBYism in its own way. So I think that's an important thing to flag, is that there are layers even within our own community that we're negotiating with.
And just quickly, to take it into the newer parts of the city, the GTA is home to, I think, one of the largest concentration of slab apartment buildings, like from the 60s and 70s, anywhere in North America. And they're like those really colorful toys that you get your kids for Christmas. You can't move anything, and they're beautiful to look at. They're incredibly boring after 10 minutes. That's what these buildings are like. They're not flexible. They're very rigid. But there's an essay in the book by a guy named Giabatier, and he talks about growing up in one of these buildings in Scarborough, and how there's a prayer room that was sort of that became sort of a destination in the neighborhood. And there was kind of an informal sort of mechanics group in the garage, and, all sorts of stuff going on in this building that probably wasn't supposed to be going on in that building. And I think that this is a story that scales thousands of times, hundreds of times around the GTA. And it shows this, this idea that people will kind of push back against rigidity.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I'm curious, there are a few threads I want to pick up, but I'm curious, have any of you visited Ridgeway Plaza?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, bro. Yeah. Excellent. And just the other day was the Eid, and if you saw the photos at Ridgeway Plaza, you'll know that it's very similar to the Bloordale example. There's a lot of people hanging out in the back of trucks, and and music playing and flags flying. Then we have a lot of that in Brampton as well. If you go to Sheridan College on any given evening, you'll see in the plaza surrounding a lot of folks just hanging out, and that's not dissimilar to life in India, in Punjab, where a lot of these young people are from. So I think that's interesting. So Leslie, you mentioned you used the term good messy, and I'm curious, what is bad messy?
So my interpretation of bad messy is when there's no mess. And in fact, you've created space that is so structured, regulated, you only envision one possible use, one prototype of person that's going to be suited for the space. And then you try to force everyone into that mold. And therefore, that's bad. That's because it is a mess when there's all this enforcement and regulation and overly sort of manufactured and structured. And this is me as a planner saying this. It's sometimes it's the planning policies that do these things, and it bad messy is it creates chaos in a weird kind of way in trying to create this order, and that to me is bad mess. And so wherever you see, and it tends to be in highly authoritarian spaces and places. I mean, in the book, there are a couple other cities that we point to. There's a discussion about Cape Town and Tokyo and in Mexico City, where, trying to control what seems to be too much kind of pushes you in the opposite direction. But I think one of the things that's common, whether it's good mess or bad mess, is this notion of conflict. So in Chi and Tam's story, there's this kind of notion that the conflict, the argument, is actually part of what makes things work. There's this story that Dr. Eileen de Villa talks about the site of where the Toronto Public Health Office was. There was it's not there anymore, but on the inside, people were being healed. And on the outside, it was a bit messy. And people only saw the outside, they didn't see the inside. And so but that conflict, that created a lot of conflict, and onto itself had its own conflict. So healthy conflict is a good indicator of good mess.
I mean, I think it's an important question, and it's one that all of the writers engage with, and I don't think there's a simple answer. There's certainly things that are a bad mess, like garbage, litter, or whatever. I think to some extent, I was thinking about this. A bad mess is from neglect often, whereas a good mess is from initiative or creativity or solutions. So, but that's I think, one way of possibly looking at it, but it's certainly not an absolute. And I think a lot of times there's things that it's really in the eye of the beholder, right? I mean, we have a whole section on graffiti. Graffiti is bad mess to some people and good mess to others. Some graffiti is better than others to different people, right? So, and those are the tensions but like that's kind of said, like the point of the book is to bring out the value of tensions, kind of like what Leslie's saying. A little bit of that tension, a little bit of that conflict is valuable and brings energy to a city.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Actually, if we're jumping ahead to the end of the book, I can all of you indicate you specifically mention the mess that is brought about through these corporate entities like Airbnb and Uber, and that was sort of my gentle critique of the book as I was reading through it. I was thinking, well, there are some folks who actually embrace messiness, this language of messiness, as sort of a rebrand of the innovation kind of paradigm to solve some of these problems. And just to tie this into Zahra's first chapter, where she talks about the daily interruptions of living in a city, and I think about things like Uber Eats and DoorDash that seemingly erase these daily interruptions and look to optimize convenience and take you out of having to put on your shoes and go join a line and have to interact with the cashier and pay your food ticket home. Instead, you could just be at home watching Netflix and have your food delivered to you. So I'm curious if there are any reactions to this sort of corporate slash innovation sort of paradigm that looks to solve some of these problems.
I mean, in my introduction, I sort of acknowledge that but say that that's not really what, that's not what a lot of people talked about that, right? But definitely, to me, it's a lot of those corporate, it's basically a commodification of messiness. And it's happened for a long time. I mean, in the old days, messiness does have a certain cachet in some ways, right? That kind of vibrancy. So, in the old days, corporations used to put posters up on hoardings illegally to advertise things, right? And then, of course, with the technology, it was always about disruption. So it was using that language of messiness to kind of pursue corporate gain. I think that there is an argument about whether some of that was possibly still good for cities. That's a good question, but I think what it is definitely that sort of commodification of messiness, right? That attempt to use that the appeal of messiness to sell a corporate agenda. And like I said, you can have. We didn't really get into it because that's a whole other issue. You can have arguments whether that's good or bad. But I think that is the key thing there is that underlying appeal of messiness that maybe hadn't been articulated before, but that they are appealing to, the disruption, challenging authority, that kind of thing.
Well, it's like grit. Everyone wants to go find grit. When you travel, I want to find the gritty part of the city, and then the grit has been commodified, and it's character, and it's like, and then the people of Barcelona rear up and say, no more Airbnbs. And I mean, it speaks to the fact that cities are incredibly dynamic places. Like I used to drive through here when I was a teenager on Highway 10, and that was 40 years ago. So not that recently, but not that far away. And, incredible difference. And everywhere in the GTA. And so it's hard to, it's like a moving river, and the messiness is important to preserve in that, as opposed to try to eradicate it. But that means holding on to this kind of unstable state, as opposed to commodifying it.
I mean, you both said it so well, but you just made me think, John, it's like, the grit is kind of like bragging rights, right? Like when you go to a new city, you find that thing that is not on the map because you were walking and paying attention and not looking at your phone. Like it is the bragging rights. It goes to, Dylan's first point, which is like, it is the reason we live in, it's part of the reason that we live in cities, is we love having those bragging rights when we discover something that seems like it was undiscoverable, that seems like it'll only be there for a moment. And so I think part of the commodification is that, it's move fast and break things at the start, but then it becomes like everything else in a city. It becomes very institutionalized, and it takes away that surprise and delight. And so I think the kind of mess that we're talking about is sort of has that ephemeral quality of delight. It continues to, versus just, a lot of the examples that we talk about at the end of the book. It's we kind of know the path, the actor. It doesn't leave any room for discovery once it exists.
Yeah, I mean, we were really focusing on the mess created by the grassroots level, like individuals or small, neighborhoods or communities, or that kind of.
John, please help us.
There are 94 municipalities in LA County. It's
Insane.
I do some reporting for a California publication and on municipal stuff, and it is crazy. Like it makes you think of, our municipal governance system, which is far from perfect, but it's so nuts. I think that. So the answer is that there's no set answer. Like it had been lots of these discussions where, you say, okay, well, what are we talking about when we talk about Toronto? I was at some focus group on a Toronto museum, and what are we talking about when we're talking about a museum for Toronto? And, in my view, you can't stop at the municipal boundary, right? Because it's not, it doesn't make sense. There's some of you who live here, work in Toronto, some of you who live here work in Mississauga or working well for KW, people who commute from, east to west and west to east and downtown to uptown. So so I think that the actual watershed analogy is a pretty good one, not as a watershed, but as a this kind of economic social ecosystem. And in planning, I mean, Leslie, you could talk to this too, right? There are these there's commuter sheds and there's labor markets that and the edges of them as to what the city is.
Emily wants me to say. Oh, sorry. I guess, to John's point, it's a big region. There's a story in there I talk about because I spent a lot of time when the province was trying to develop a growth management plan for the whole region and what it was like to sit in the rooms with those mayors and chairs and private sector and not-for-profit folks, and what a mess it was in the conversations at the beginning. But the thing that emerged and that helped sort of give everybody a space to identify themselves was understanding why are we all here and what is it for? And I think that the notion of mess when it comes to these large macro regional conversations gets more complicated because individual municipalities, they have autonomy, but at the same time, it's a little bit of a false narrative to say you have autonomy because everything is so tied to everything else, your economy, your environment, how people live, work, and play. And so I think the only thing I can say with regards to how do you make sense of it is when leadership steps up in a way that tries to actually understand at a very principled level, what is it we can do together and what is it that we should do we have to do separately. And right now we have a lot of what we can do separately and not a lot of what is it we can do together. But you need both because the way, it's a nested series of systems that we live in. And the more disconnected they are, the more chaotic, not messy, it becomes.
So I just want to throw in one thing. Is the Los Angeles and Toronto, the GTA is a really good comparison because there's a balance to be struck. You could say that Los Angeles's governance system over this huge region is way too messy. There are too many agencies and sub-agencies. It's just too much. So you can say, okay, well, we want to rationalize that. And, the GTA has gone through numerous rationalizations where, the city of Toronto was like this tiny thing in the middle and then started gobbling up these like little hamlets. And then, the province created the regions and amalgamated Mississauga and Brampton and so on. But you can go overboard in demessifying governance, right? By creating too much. And, we both were, Leslie and I, me as a journalist, Leslie as a
Humble bureaucrat.
Both saw these efforts to, create a GTA-wide regional government, for example. And, as I think back on it, I think, okay, maybe too much order there and not enough space for more movement.
Can I add? Oh, do you want to say something, Bob? I was just going to say, just another take, because there's a few, I was just thinking about when we were doing a project in 2014 ahead of the federal election looking at a national urban agenda, and we basically just said, hey, if you're urban or urbanizing, put your hand up anywhere across the country and you can participate. And it was so fascinating because I remember very vividly a librarian calling me from some very small town in Saskatchewan that had been forever 500 people. And she's like, we'd like to participate in the We Are Cities National Urban Agenda project. And I was like, well, okay. And it was the first of a series of calls that I would get very regularly. And it always went something like, we've been 500 people for 40 years. And now all these people are moving into our town and we're 1,200 people now. We are urbanizing. So we are feeling the same pressure relative to a place like Toronto that's doubling. But for us to go from 500 to 1,000 people and servicing the needs of that is urbanizing. And you see it at the level of community and, like communities going through revitalization, but you also see it at the level of all sorts of communities across the country who now are like, oh no, we're cities too. Please include us in the conversation. And these are just places that are experiencing pressures, and the pressures feel the same relative to their scale.
If I could just one more sort of element into the mix of this sort of, 'cause I like this theme that we're going on here when we're talking about how these disparate places or some of these standalone places start to urbanize. We're talking about connections now. And we talked about it at the governance level, but there's also this piece, and there's a lot of folks in the room right now that are transit oriented, active transit, public transit, and so forth. We're really having a conversation about how people move around these places, as much as we're talking about the places themselves. And to me, there is nothing messier in our neck of the woods anyway than transit as a conversation in general. I'm just curious from your perspective, how does that fit into all this? We've been talking about messy in place as though a lot of times that we're standing in one place, but that's not how we actually operate in the world we exist in. There's the messiness of my neighborhood, which is different than the messiness of where I work, which is different than the messiness of where my kids go to school, and on and on and on. And in every one of those interactions, I'm moving through those places, and I'm moving through other people's messes in order to get from one mess to the other. Where did that come in, or do you have a perspective on how these places connect and how we make them all work in a way that's cohesive, not just like governance, but at that very practical way that people live in these places?
Okay, can I just say before you start talking, I feel like we should all be putting the mics in Leslie's face, like a first from, as the person who used to be a senior bureaucrat in transit.
So this is not in the book, but here, this particular necessarily this exploration that you describe. But here's the dilemma with what you describe. So why is it a mess? There are many reasons. But for example, we've got 11 transit authorities. And if every transit authority onto their self decided they wanted this width of bus or this gauge of track, and then as you cross the border, it's another different thing, it would just be a hiccuping your way all the way. So just from a very purely functional standpoint, that creates all kinds of confusion, disconnection. You can't get a system. And then, use the example of the fare system. There's another ongoing, still not quite there in terms of, and it is, as much as it is an infrastructure question, it's a governance question too, right? So in other large cities, it's governed by one. And so there's downsides to centralization, but there's also upsides when you can standardize. And the challenge is, just as you say, any piece of infrastructure that's moving is touching lots more people than a building that's standing in one place. And so you're managing, we just talked about all the different needs, all the different perspectives, all the different views about how to get from A to B. And up until, still, there's a competition that goes on. The car versus the bike versus the scooter versus the streetcar versus all that. And we have not been able to resolve the fact that actually we need all of them, and they need all of them to work together. And that has created a bit, that's the state we are in right now. And it's taking a long time because people don't have much choice. That being said, there's something like $70 billion being expended to expand transit in this region. Hard to believe because everybody's sitting here going, I don't see it. Where is it? But that's what's going on. And it's a bit of the time lag between satisfying the need, the speed of that can't keep pace with the scale at which the changes need to happen. Housing is the same thing. Housing affordability, same dilemma. Infrastructure that has not kept pace and that we sort of treat as a single answer to a problem and don't understand that the individual needs, which we call a mess, actually needs to be satisfied in order for things to work better.
So I wrote a little bit about this on a very micro level on flexible streets, which is the idea that streets can change their purpose at different times of year or on different days or whatever. And I think it comes to an interesting issue. I do a lot of walking, obviously, and it speaks walking, but this is actually true of the whole street, which is every street is both a place and a transportation mode, right? So a street is a place for people to be, but also a street is a place people are going through. And trying to find that balance It's kind of what it speaks to what you're saying is part of the challenge, right? Like a main street, you want it to be a place that is a destination. People are walking and hanging out, but it's also a place that people have to go through to get places. And that's true of all streets, really. You know, there are places where people live, there are also places people go through. And so that's an interesting, I think, and that's an essential kind of element of messiness, right? Like trying to find that balance, trying to find how the streets, and maybe those streets aren't always the same thing. Maybe a street is a festival for, a day or a weekend, and not a place to go through. And then other times it's a place that you can drive through. Maybe you have cafes and the parking spots during the summer, and then they become parking spots during the winter. So that's one of the many tensions, I think, that's really interesting.
Maybe one more thing, Jaipaul, but just promise of one more thing. Here's, the dilemma. I know going through all these transit projects and many different stakeholders. So there are folks who want a transit stop, whatever mode it is, every corner, every block. So it's convenient. I can just walk out of my door. I used to say the best transit system would be everybody would have a subway stop right at their front door. Like that's the ideal. But that's counterintuitive to I want to get there fast, right? And so you're always balancing between these, I need a fast thing, I need a not so fast thing, I need a convenient thing. And if we had all the money in the world, we could maybe do all of that. But you have a finite amount of resource, and you're trying to distribute on more need than you can satisfy.
Just quickly, think about highways. So in New York City in the 40s and 50s and 60s, Robert Moses built these enormous inner city highways, obliterated neighborhoods, created these very difficult to sort of cross barriers. And I don't think transit does that, right? So if you have to choose modes, right, the one that's most likely to preserve granularity and encourage, human activity and, all the things that we like about cities, it's going to be, the non-highway alternative. And, when you mentioned in your, at the beginning, thinking about generations from now, that fourth track, generations from now, we're not going to think back, or our grandchildren or great-grandchildren say, boy, I'm glad that HOV lane was transitioned into a regular lane. That won't be their fondest wish, right?
Imagine if they do.
But that's right.
So we're raising them up wrong.
Yeah, so I just want to do a quick plug because at the Order Trade, we are big fans of transit, and we do have a transportation paper co-written by Jonathan English. And, he's very influential on, in particular, the Presto One Fair. So we'll furnish you with that report.
You should go down to talk to the Toronto Region Board of Trade.
They
and
just
teach them
released
what they
it.
say too.
We didn't say it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So, and just to wrap up this transit piece before we turn it over to folks for questions, I am a big fan of TransLink, and in particular, the sort of regional approach to planning transit. And Surrey is growing enormously. Well, we can just build a SkyTrain station there, and I think there's a lot of value to that. So.
I tried to convince the city, hey, we should do patios and allow that. And what they told me is, okay, if someone wanted to do that, first you need to make sure to get a site plan, and then you need to submit a $6,000 fee committee of adjustment, and then maybe it'll get approved. Also, you need to amend the zoning bylaw to reduce the amount of parking. The zoning bylaw amendment now is, I think, $43,000 for that. And then during the pandemic, suddenly we were able to change it. And it's how you convince urban planners and policyholders. Sometimes it is not a productive use of time to make people pay $50,000 in fees to do a patio taking up like 3 parking spaces on their own property, mind you. We're not talking about occupying part of a city road, but on their own property. How do you convince them to give up that death grip on power that is strangling the city's road?
Oh, man.
You make them read Messy Cities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's it. So first of all, that's a great description, because I think what you're describing is the inability to imagine different and not to understand that the benefits of doing like something like that, they're community building, they're economic drivers, there's all these different things. And then the last thing to that I would say is David Crombie would always say, or many people say, never let a crisis go to waste. And the fact that you were able to overcome that during the pandemic, one of the silver linings of the pandemic is the ability to know that you can actually do it without great harm.
But I'll also say, in a way, you set up the situation, right? Like, because you already had the idea, because you had made them think about it,
Yes.
even if they were resisting, once the crisis arrived, they were able to make that move quickly. And I kind of talked about that a little bit in my piece here, how the city of Toronto, it was sort of stumbling towards these things, but it had done enough that when the pandemic hit, it was able to pivot much faster than anyone expected. So I guess the thing is that push, even if it's frustrating,
That's right. Don't give up.
you're setting up the possibility, and when the opportunity comes, and you're able to strike, as it were.
The old saying, right? It's better to beg forgiveness than to ask permission. And I think a little bit of, a little less deference to municipal authority is never a bad thing.
I'll also just say, I don't know if this is helpful because I haven't done enough research on it, but John and I were on a panel I don't know, everything was last week now. A busy week, I guess. But we were on a panel with someone from City Parks in Toronto, and we were talking about William White's film, The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces, and we ended up in a conversation about like, why can't we have nicer parks? Like, why can't... And, one of the conversation at some point went to like, we just get so committed to figuring out one right way to do things and then never veering away from it. And I think one of the things that, I can't remember which one of us, maybe me, I don't know, brought into the conversation was, we need to get better at like an active prototyping, testing, learning, and then creating a suite of options that can respond. And the guy from Parks, what was his name again? Eric? No.
Guy from Parks.
Nice guy from Parks, we'll call him, was telling us that the city of Toronto is piloting a project called Parks in Progress, which is their version of saying, instead of just set it and forget it style policy and planning, maybe we'll put things in, give it a time limit to learn from it, and then continue to iterate it. So that felt like a signal in the noise, maybe a bellwether of good things to come, where the city can learn to test things before they commit to one way of doing things forever. But you should look up the program, because all I know is what I learned on that panel. So
We do have some folks from the city, so please take note.
You wrote about this time of growth that we're in at the turn of millennium, resulting in a bit of a metropolitan hydra. I loved that expression. I thought it was a really good visual to sort of think about where we are in this huge growth period, and dovetailing on what Jaipaul said, that movement and access is really a key priority, or should be a key priority, to that tactical urbanism, to get to that, what I thought of the book as like a goal statement of vibrancy. And looking at all those compounding barriers, whether it's access to reliable transit, access to affordable transit, safe access to all of these vibrant sub-communities within this metropolitan hydra, access to healthcare, so that the members of the community are able to go out and be participants. Do you think that in this growth period that we're in, and you talked about your participation in some of the smart growth panel sessions that resulted from that tactical urbanism and protection of if the goal is vibrancy, and that is achieved through access, and that is achieved through safe access. So the chapter on women and girls and their ability to participate in and not be excluded, or the chapter on looking at the parallels of Gaza and being actually physically excluded from participating in certain urban centers. or whether it's a barrier from the lack of healthcare or from lack of equal access to healthcare or affordable transit or reliable transit. I just wonder, do you think that tactical urbanism is going to be a work in progress or result in some key reprioritization to achieve that vibrancy or protect staying that vibrancy?
Okay, that's a really hard question. Can I just say, so maybe I'll answer the question in this way. So after spending 12 and a half years working in the transit infrastructure space, and the last 5 in a similar challenge around housing affordability, there's one conclusion I have come to, which is that this notion of the Hydra is not just about tackling mobility by itself. It is about basically the need for greater partnership and collaboration between what's happening in housing, what's happening in transit, what's happening in the social services, more and more, to answer your question, for this region, the lack of ability to tie these things well together is setting us further and further behind. And the reason I say this is because I've been spending the last 3 years on the question of workforce housing affordability. And it's tied to issues of transit. Why is it that nurses and teachers and bus drivers can't afford to live near where they work? It's a transit issue, but it's a whole bunch of other, it's about living wage. It's about, how much attention we've paid or not paid to supportive housing. These are all people who have jobs that used to be able to own a home or rent something that was big enough for a family. And so I'm answering your question by saying the complexity of this hydra just keeps getting more and more layered and complicated. And so all of what you said now requires a degree of leadership and the ability to know how to collaborate and work together, which is the skill that I'm so concerned about that we are not honing in our young people, in our leaders, and the polarization that everything is drifting towards is not enabling the region and the kind of many-headed region to come together to make sense to so many people. And so, what do I do with this information? It's really hard because it means that you have to keep looking around and nurturing more and more young people, rising leaders in the community, these folks, you folks, but really being able to listen to the different components of what solutions are, because we have fragmented solutions, and I call them random acts of kindness, trying to address the issues that we just talked about. And so you can't solve, because I've seen it, we cannot solve the mobility problem by just building more projects. We can't solve the housing affordability problem by just building more housing. Literally, it will not solve the affordability problem. And so when you start to get to that place, then you realize there's something more that we're not doing, which is not just about a CapEx problem or an OpEx problem. There's something inherent about how we're working together or not working together. Anyway, tomorrow we release at Civic Action the final piece about the importance about how to really evaluate the quality of partnerships that you need to address some of these more complicated issues.
Wow.
Sorry, that's
a great answer. Wow, wonderful. Round of applause for Leslie.
I tried.
Anisha.
To you is and we were having a conversation before the event started, and you were talking about how people travel to all these wonderful places and they see all these wonderful things. So you mentioned about Los Angeles. I've been to Los Angeles back in 2004. It never struck me at that point to wonder there are 94 counties and they all have their own transit system, etc. But I was recently in India and I looked at the amount, and I went back home. So that's home for me. Well, used to be home for me. This is home now. You go Brampton. And yes, when you say messy cities, Brampton does come to mind right off the top of my head. So my point is, people travel to all these wonderful places. They see all these wonderful things happening. We come back and we talk amongst ourselves. Oh, by the way, I went there, so-and-so place, and this was amazing, and so on and so forth. You've edited the book, you've read all the stories that people have submitted for the book. What is it that if you had to kind of sum it up, for me as a person who's on the Policy and Government Relations Committee, the advocate for a lot of changes, we are progressive thinkers because we are planning for the future. If you had to sum it up and say, Amisha, tomorrow when you go and talk to, say, Doug Ford or Mark Carney or whoever it may be, this is what you should talk about and this is how you can position. Because I always wonder, why is it that people are not, they're seeing, are they observing? And then are they observing and then are they implementing that? Coming back here, I have the power to advocate for something. How do I make it happen? Not just for my future generations. They will, my daughter, when the LRT announcement happened, I said, yeah, when my daughter has kids, maybe that's when we'll travel on the LRT. And it's true because it's taking so long. But I want to enjoy the LRT now. I want to go places now and I want it to be quick. So what is it, if you had to sum it up, what is it that I could do tomorrow if I were sitting beside Doug Ford or Mark? Right.
Express yourself. I think that the thing that we're talking about in messy cities is people who live in cities who are using their voices in doing things that they may not supposed to do, and just assert, what you've said, right? I mean, I think the antithesis of a messy city is a passive city that kind of receives authority and everybody does what they're told. And, Toronto used to be that city, really. It was very rigid in its mores and its beliefs. And the less we do that, I think the better off we are. And it's not going to be a coherent message, right? It's going to be lots of voices, but they have to hear those voices.
I was going to just follow up because I think Vijay and Jaipaul's earlier podcast conversation, where is the opposition, right? Yeah. So if it's not sitting in city council or if it's not sitting in parliament, the citizenry is the opposition or the critics, or that voice needs to be heard because there are many forces suppressing that voice. And so to your question, what do I say? It doesn't have to be a statement. It could be a question. How are you addressing A, B, or C? How are you making sure that Brampton or whatever is part of the beneficiaries of what X and Y? Or how? So the questioning is as important as having the right answer, because I don't think anybody really has the right answer. But there are not enough people, organizations, individuals questioning. And I think, because it's overwhelming. I mean, everything's overwhelming. Right, don't you think?
Yeah. Yes,
I'm overwhelmed.
It's overwhelming. I agree. Yes, Leslie. But I think the second part of that is like a can we try this?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Like I think that's the thing, is that I think that's why a lot of the feedback from the public gets dismissed because it's just complaints. I don't want this. Well, then what do we want? And so the can we try is equally as important. As why not? And then with a specific idea. I think maybe this is controversial, but I think one of the things, if we can get better at this, which is, I think, part of the fear, at least in sort of elected officials, is if we do the thing, and we get it wrong, we won't get reelected, we'll never get to do anything again. And I think, when you're working with your elected officials, whoever it is, this institution that you're speaking to, that you're using your voice with, I think having some grace to say, let's try something. If it doesn't work, we own it with you too, because we're trying it together. I think that turns down the temperature a lot, to say we're going to do this in collaboration. You're going to do this with our help. Because I think that is the thing that we want, is to at the very least try and just use that as some empirical data to find what works within the solution that we're most excited about. And I think that's equally as much a part of it.
Well, then the examples in the book that's like that. I mean, we talked about some of the ones that are kind of just done purely initiative, but there's a project in here called Plaza Pops, which was an initiative, but it worked with the city. But it pushed the city to do something new, which was to actually, speaking to the first question, transform parking lots in plaza retail into an open public sitting space. They didn't do it tactically urbanism. They did it with the city, but they pushed the city. They were like, we want to do this. They found property owners who wanted to do this, who were willing, and then they kind of said, look, we have property owners who want to do this. We have support. We found support. We've got community support. And then the city was like, oh, okay, well, I guess you can give it a try. So that's also a pathway to messy cities is to, like Zahra said, come up with a project and say, we want to do this. We have support. Like, come on, everybody wants this. There's no harm. Let's go ahead.
Just to hot pursuit that Plaza Pops was then demoed they prototyped it in plazas all across Toronto. And actually just today, we got a call from them saying that they're doing their first permanent one, which is so exciting. And what's great about it is that they tested it for years and years and years. I'm trying to think how many years it's been now. It's been a long time. It's been 7, 8 at least years where they've been testing it on different sites and working with the landowners and working with the local businesses and working with the community. So it got lots of prototypes. They built up an evidence base. They actually now are there are a few places that would welcome a more permanent structure, like the seating and performance and gathering structure. But they're adding a layer now. Right now, they're getting to the more systemic things, right? Because the Plaza Pop itself is a surface level response for social infrastructure. But the subtext of it is, so how did they get to do it, right? And so what they're starting to do now, and part of the reason we got the call was, okay, so now we want to figure out what are the sort of key capacities someone needs to be able to envision a Plaza Pops type project, not in and of itself, but to start something that becomes so significant that the city now has it was a Plaza Pop, I forget what it's called, but they did a report on these. There was a report that went to council about this, which is this is working, it's doing something, and it's been institutionalized in a way that now we're sort of starting to build the capacity. How do you do neighborhood level, community-led social infrastructure? And so they're becoming increasingly more sophisticated, and these things are becoming part of the fabric of neighborhoods and increasing our capacity, to go back to your question, to have places of connection.
Think about the work that we do at the Board of Trade. I think part of it is to help inspire an entry point into the advocacy that we're doing here. But we can't advocate about everything and for everything with a megaphone. But we try. We do try, and to the extent that we can help, demystify some of the infrastructure and provide some civic literacy where we can. That's what we try to do. And one sort of relevant story comes to mind. As I mentioned, I traveled to Los Angeles recently. Zoe and I, we hiked actually this beautiful park, Kenneth Hahn Park. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's actually sort of a gem in Los Angeles. But we hiked one morning, and the person that we were with, I noticed these massive oil rigs sort of on the outskirts of the park, and the person we were with shared that the intention was to have all of it be oil rigs, and it was only because of the advocacy of the local residents who loved this park and loved the beautiful views that they would get. And they wrote their letters to the councilors and to the what do they call it, Congress people or senators, whatever they have in the U.S. And they got really loud, and they said, you know what, we love this park, we want this park. And the compromise was they had most of the park, and then they had some oil rigs in the distance. But ultimately, that park doesn't exist without the voice of the local community. So if you're interested in understanding how you can depute at council or send a letter to your MP, MPP, let us know, and we're happy to support you in your journey there. So with that, please give a round of applause to the co-editors of Messy City. And thank you so much for sharing your insight and wisdom, and thank you for taking the GO train up to Brampton. Thank you for your patience as we do our first live podcast. We're figuring it out as we go, and I thought this was a lot of fun. So thank you for your wonderful questions as well. I'll pass it over to Jaipaul to wrap this up.
Oh, and thank you. As all said, I appreciate once again the authors for making the time and the conversation. Thank you for questions. We have the room for a while, so please by all means hang out and ask your questions.
I also, in the spirit of messiness, it thrilled me to no end the number of you who brought flyers, who brought little postcards. Everyone here is working a secondary agenda. And I really appreciate y'all for the hustle. This is what Brandy's all about. So connect with people while you're in the room, because there's a lot of subversive stuff happening in this room if we talk to each other. And there's some great pamphlets and stuff at the front desk. I know there are people here doing some really great things for this community. Get to know the folks in this room. This is a great room to be in. And with that, I just want to thank one more time our sponsors who allowed this to happen. Callow Developments, Inzola, Scooty, The Beehive, Amazon, and of course, Y Media. A round of applause for all of them. Thank you. And just as a couple final thoughts, as Vijay shared, what we're doing here is reflective of how we approach all things at the Board of Trade. There is no issue that's not an important issue in this community. There is no issue in our mind that doesn't merit at least a conversation. If we can help you, if you can learn from our mistakes, if we can help open a door for you, please let us know. We are an organization, but this community doesn't move forward unless everyone is pulling in the same direction. And so let us know how we can help facilitate that, whether it be through the Board of Trade or through whatever it is that Vijay and I can share with you as far as wisdom goes. And then there's the last thing I just want to share. The podcast very much was a reflection of us being procrastinators in the office. But this event is the second of an event that we started last year. We did an event, some of you were able to attend, called Moving the Needle, which was all around housing advocacy, affordable housing, and housing options. Leslie was a panelist. You're a two-time panelist.
Kevin as well.
Kevin at the back was also a panelist. So we have half our panelists here. We can do a whole housing demo. All of it is one.
Late night.
Yes. But I share that to say, I just, a lot of folks deserve credit for what's going on here. Brianna, Josh, as part of the Board of Trade team, helping put this together. But I just do want to take a second to acknowledge Vijay. None of this happens. That event last year was his brainchild. The work that we do on advocacy, this podcast, this event this evening was all due to this guy. And I just want to make sure he gets a round of applause as well. There we go. And with that, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate being here. Keep listening to the podcast, or don't. Perhaps you got enough tonight. Take some refreshments. Otherwise, we have to eat them all. And we appreciate you all. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you.
Fastest growing media group in North America.